I used to believe that quitting drinking would be simple, a matter of willpower, a quick decision followed by steady progress. I imagined myself waking up one morning, dropping the bottle, and walking straight into a brighter, cleaner version of my life. I had no idea how wrong I was. Sobriety didn't arrive as a burst of clarity or sudden strength. It arrived as confusion, fear, and an endless confrontation with parts of myself I had buried for years. At first, I didn't even understand what I was feeling. I only knew I was tired. Tired of blackouts, tired of lying to myself, tired of waking up every morning with guilt sitting on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I knew I needed to stop, but I didn't know how. And when the truth finally hit me, it didn't feel empowering. It felt terrifying. This is the story of how sobriety broke me open before it ever started to heal me. A story of withdrawal, shame, anger, small victories, and even smaller steps forward. A story about meetings I didn't want to attend, people who saw through me before I could see myself, and the long, quiet moments where I had to decide, again and again, not to give up. It isn't the story of a hero or a sudden transformation. It's the story of a person learning, slowly and painfully, how to feel again. How to rebuild. How to live without numbing everything that hurt. And how, somewhere along the way, I discovered that the life I had always wanted wasn't waiting at the finish line. It was being built in the messy, ordinary moments of choosing sobriety one day at a time. For years I told myself a single, polished lie, that I was in control. I repeated it so many times that it became almost comforting, like a mantra meant to protect me from the truth. I can stop whenever I want, I would say, even as I poured another drink. I'm just unwinding. I'd insist, even when I wasn't sure what I was winding down from anymore. The lie kept me warm. It kept me numb. And worst of all, it kept me from seeing what I was becoming. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. There was no accident, no arrest, no catastrophic scene that forced me to face reality. It was just a morning like any other, except that when I opened my eyes, something inside me felt wrong. I didn't feel sick or hungover. I felt empty. Like I had reached the end of something without realizing I had ever started it. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, unable to move. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. But my mind felt like it had finally slipped off a ledge I didn't even know I was standing on. That was the morning I said the words out loud for the first time. I can't do this anymore. My voice was small, shaky. I wasn't even sure who I was talking to, the walls, the universe, or the version of myself who had been drowning for years. Admitting it didn't feel powerful. It felt humiliating. Like I had failed at something everyone else seemed to handle so easily. But the truth was simple. Drinking had stopped being a choice a long time ago. It had become the lens through which I saw the world, the solution to every feeling, the shield I hid behind. And now, stripped of the illusion of control, I suddenly felt exposed, raw, fragile, painfully sober in a way I hadn't been in years. I didn't know how to get better. I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that the lie I'd relied on for so long had finally collapsed. And with nothing left to hide behind, I took my first step into a life I didn't feel ready for, a life without alcohol. The first day without alcohol wasn't triumphant. It wasn't brave. It was terrifying. My body didn't know what to do with itself. My mind didn't either. Everything felt too loud, the ticking of the clock, the sound of passing cars, the beating of my own heart. I kept pacing from room to room, touching objects without purpose, a cup, a book, the doorknob. I didn't know how to exist without the slow burn of alcohol softening the edges of reality. By mid-morning, the cravings hit hard. Not just the physical pull, but the emotional one, the whisper that said, "Just one drink. You can regroup. You can try again tomorrow." That voice had been my companion for so long that arguing with it felt like arguing with a part of myself. But instead of giving in, I sat on the floor and tried to breathe. My chest felt tight. My thoughts raced. Every problem I'd avoided for years seemed to rush in at once, demanding attention. Then came the shame, thick, suffocating, impossible to shake. Memories surfaced in flashes, slurred sentences, forgotten nights, promises I never kept. I felt like I was being haunted by every version of myself I had tried to drink away. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I just stared at the wall, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. In the afternoon, desperation pushed me to look up local recovery meetings. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers and confessing my failures made my stomach twist, but the alternative was worse, being alone with my thoughts and the bottle I was so used to reaching for. I didn't know if meetings actually helped. I didn't know if they were for people like me. But I needed something, anything, to break the cycle. I didn't go that day. I wasn't ready. But searching for the meeting times, even briefly, felt like the smallest flicker of hope, a tiny gesture toward a life I wasn't sure I wanted but knew I needed. That night, I went to bed early, exhausted from doing nothing but fighting myself. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel accomplished. I only felt relieved that the day was over. One day without alcohol. One day of discomfort, fear, and raw honesty. I didn't know if I could do it again tomorrow. But for the first time, I was willing to try. On the second day, I forced myself to attend a meeting. I told myself I was only going to observe, not speak, not participate, just sit quietly and slip out as soon as it ended. Walking there felt like dragging a boulder behind me. Every step was a negotiation. Every thought tried to convince me to turn back. But I kept going, one slow, reluctant movement at a time. The building was unimpressive, a faded church basement with a crooked sign and a door that creaked when I pulled it open. Inside, the smell of old coffee mixed with dust. The room was arranged in a circle of mismatched chairs, each one occupied by someone who looked far more certain of what they were doing than I felt. I avoided eye contact and sat near the edge, close enough to the exit to escape if the pressure became unbearable. When the meeting started, people introduced themselves with a mixture of calm and vulnerability that unsettled me. They spoke plainly about their struggles, their relapses, their victories, their darkest moments. There was no bravado, no preaching, just honesty. Raw, uncomfortable honesty. It made my skin prickle. Part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to know how they weren't drowning in their own confessions. Then a man named Morrow began to speak. His voice was steady, warm, weathered by time. He talked about fear, not the loud kind, but the quiet fear of facing yourself after years of hiding behind a substance. He described the first days of sobriety as stepping into blinding light after living in darkness. It hurts at first, he said. But the longer you stand in it, the more you see. Something in me cracked at those words. Not a breakdown, just a shift. A small, fragile understanding that maybe what I was feeling wasn't failure. Maybe it was the beginning. I didn't speak that day. My throat tightened every time I considered it. But when the meeting ended, no one pressured me. No one asked for explanations. A few people simply nodded, as if to say, "You showed up. That's enough." Walking home, I felt strangely lighter. Not healed, not confident, just aware of a possibility I hadn't sensed before. Maybe I didn't have to do this alone. Maybe the room I hadn't wanted to enter was exactly where I needed to be. That night, for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep without feeling like I was at war with myself. What no one tells you about sobriety is that the memories don't go away. They get louder. Sharper. They lose the foggy edges that alcohol used to blur. Suddenly, I remembered things I didn't even know I had forgotten. Nights I thought I'd blacked out, conversations I wish I hadn't had, faces I had pushed into the background of my mind. Like her. I hadn't thought about her in months. Maybe years. But on day 14, her name echoed in my chest like it had just been spoken. Emily. We met at a bar, fitting right? She had this laugh that cracked open the air, and eyes that looked like they saw too much. We were fire and gasoline, beautiful for a moment, then explosive. She left the night I punched a wall and accused her of flirting with someone who wasn't even there. I don't remember the fight, only the way she cried, and the sound of the door slamming shut. The next morning, I found blood on my knuckles and her ring on the counter. I never tried to call. What would I say? Sorry I chose the bottle over you. Sorry I don't even remember the words that made you walk away? Now sober, her memory came back with full force. I thought about looking her up, about writing something, not to get her back, but to finally say what I couldn't before. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I wrote her name in my notebook. One word. No explanation. The group meetings helped. Every story someone told, I saw myself in pieces. There was David, who hadn't seen his daughter in 5 years. Karen, who drank to survive her own reflection. Luis, who joked too much, but cried when he thought no one was watching. I wasn't alone. That should have made it easier. But some nights, it made it worse, knowing how many of us were quietly falling apart in our own corners of the world. And still, I didn't drink. Not that week. Not that day. That became my new rule: don't drink today. Tomorrow will deal with itself. By the 3rd week, my body felt like a machine that had been running on the wrong fuel for years. I woke up drenched in sweat, my hands shaking as if they were trying to escape from me. Food tasted different, sharper, almost too real. My heartbeat, once muffled under layers of alcohol, now thudded loud enough to remind me, constantly, that I was alive and unmedicated by the numbness I had grown addicted to. Sleep became a negotiation. I would lie down exhausted, but the moment I closed my eyes, my mind started replaying moments I didn't ask for. I remembered the night I stumbled into my apartment, knocking over a lamp, laughing to myself until the laughter turned into a sob I didn't understand. I remembered the taxi driver who asked if I was okay, and how I told him I was better than ever, when I could barely hold my head up. Without alcohol, my body was finally free to feel everything I had been suppressing: anxiety, guilt, grief, even boredom. I hadn't realized how terrified I was of boredom until I faced it sober. Without something in my hand, without the ritual of pouring a drink, stirring it, sipping it, the evenings stretched out like empty hallways. I didn't know what to do with my hands, my time, my mind. I tried replacing the rituals. Tea. Then sparkling water. Then pacing around my apartment like a caged animal. Nothing filled the void. Nothing even came close. It wasn't the drink I missed, it was the version of me it allowed me to pretend I was. The fearless one. The charming one. The one who didn't overthink every word before speaking it. One night, I felt the urge stronger than ever. It came like a wave, sudden, overwhelming, almost physical. I could taste the burn of whiskey on my tongue. I could feel the warmth spreading through my chest. My feet actually moved toward the door, toward the street where the neon sign of the liquor store glowed like a beacon. But something stopped me. A picture on my fridge. One I rarely noticed. Me, 2 years younger, holding a beer, smiling with that wide, reckless grin I thought looked carefree. But now, sober, I saw the truth in my eyes. They were empty. Exhausted. Lost. I stood there, gripping the handle of the fridge, staring at my past self. And for the first time, I didn't feel longing. I felt anger. Deep, boiling anger at the years I had thrown away. At the lies I had told myself. At the pain I had ignored. I backed away from the door like it was on fire. Sat on the floor. Pressed my palms to my eyes until the urge faded. I didn't drink that night. And for the first time since I started this journey, that felt like a victory, not a punishment. Sobriety comes with a strange kind of disappointment no one warns you about. The world doesn't clap for you. No parade, no applause, no dramatic movie soundtrack swelling in the background. I stopped drinking, and life just continued. People went to work, cars honked in traffic, neighbors argued about trash bins. No one seemed to notice that I was fighting a war inside my own skull. At work, someone joked about how a drink fixes everything, and the room exploded in laughter. I laughed too, a reflex carved from years of pretending. But inside, something twisted. I wanted to scream that a drink had ruined everything, that it had cost me relationships, memories, pieces of myself. But instead, I swallowed the truth and stared at my keyboard until the moment passed. Social invitations got trickier. Happy hours, birthdays, casual Friday drinks. I told people I was cutting back, because saying, "I'm sober," felt too heavy, too revealing. Some friends drifted away without drama, without goodbye. We had built entire friendships on shared hangovers and blurry nights. Without alcohol, there wasn't much left to talk about. The loneliness hit harder than any craving. Not the lonely of being alone in a room, the lonely of sitting among people and feeling like I didn't belong there anymore. I watched them laughing, clinking glasses, swaying lightly with the buzz I once chased like oxygen. And I felt like I was behind a glass wall, knocking unheard. At home, evenings stretched into long, echoing corridors. I tried reading, but my mind wandered. I tried TV, but everything reminded me of drinking. I tried journaling, but some nights the words felt too heavy to pull out of my chest. That's when I started talking to myself. Whispering out loud, "You're okay. Just tonight. Breathe." It felt ridiculous, but it grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't fighting nothing, I was fighting me. The version of me that still believed alcohol was the answer to every ache. One night, after a particularly hard day, I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something important. No one was coming to save me. No applause was coming. No external reward would appear. If I wanted to stay sober, it had to be for me. And only me. And somehow, that realization, bleak as it sounded, gave me a thread of strength to hold on to. I used to think triggers were obvious: bars, bottles, parties, the clinking sound of ice in a glass. But sobriety taught me that triggers are sneaky, shapeless things. They hide in moments, in smells, in memories that slip through the cracks when I'm not paying attention. One afternoon, I walked past a bakery and smelled vanilla. Just vanilla. But mixed with the warmth of the air, it reminded me of the cheap vanilla vodka I used to drink in college. For a split second, my entire body reacted. My mouth watered, my stomach tightened, my hands twitched like they were reaching for something that wasn't there. It was absurd, humiliating even. Triggered by vanilla. But that's how landmines work. You don't see them until they explode under your feet. Another time, I found an old jacket buried in my closet. Inside one of the pockets, I felt something hard and metallic. When I pulled it out, it was a bottle opener, scratched, worn, the kind bartenders use. I stared at it like it was a relic from a past life. Funny how a simple object can hold the weight of 1,000 nights. I sat on the floor with that opener in my hand, feeling the ghost of who I used to be press against me, whispering, "Remember how good it felt?" But the worst trigger of all was the good days. The days when I felt strong, calm, almost normal. That's when the voice inside me became seductive. "See? You're fine now. You can handle just one." It wasn't the broken version of me that wanted to drink, it was the confident version. The one who thought the war was already won. That voice was dangerous. It sounded like me. It believed what it said. One evening, after a particularly smooth day, I opened my fridge without thinking. Not to get alcohol, I had none, but out of old habit. That automatic reach scared me more than the cravings. It showed me how deeply wired drinking was into my daily rhythm. Like muscle memory. Like breathing. So I started building new routines. I'd come home and immediately make tea, or change clothes, or step into the shower. Something, anything, to break the pattern that used to lead me straight to a bottle. Triggers didn't disappear. They still show up without warning. But I started learning how to defuse them. Sometimes with breathing. Sometimes with distraction. Sometimes with sheer will. And every time I survived one, even shaking, even angry, I realized something. Staying sober wasn't about being untriggered. It was about learning to walk through the minefield anyway. Around the second month of sobriety, something unexpected happened. I started seeing myself again. Not the distorted version reflected in bar windows at midnight, not the blurry silhouette I used to ignore in bathroom mirrors, but me, stripped down, unfiltered, uncomfortable in all the ways truth usually is. It began one morning when I was brushing my teeth. I looked up and didn't instantly look away. My face wasn't glowing with health or anything miraculous. I still had dark circles. My skin still looked tired. But my eyes, they were different. Clearer. Sharper. Almost present. It felt like waking up to find a stranger living in my house, except the stranger was who I was supposed to be all along. Seeing myself sober felt oddly vulnerable. Without the familiar fog, every flaw stood out. Every line on my face, every insecurity, every unfinished part of my life. Alcohol had been a mask, and now I was standing there without it, exposed to the quiet judgment of my own reflection. But there was something else too. A softness I didn't recognize. A hint of possibility. I started noticing how I moved through the world. The way I hesitated before speaking, as if rediscovering my voice. The way I listened more closely to people, no longer planning my next drink or scanning for the nearest exit. I noticed how silence felt less like an enemy and more like a space I could breathe in. Of course, not everything was poetic or profound. Some days the mirror felt like an adversary, reminding me of the years I had wasted. The relationships I had eroded. The potential I had drowned sip by sip. Some mornings I stood there and felt shame rise like a tide around my chest. But other days, I felt proud. Quietly, timidly proud. Like I was watering a plant growing in a forgotten corner of my soul, hoping it might survive this time. One evening, after a long day, I walked past the mirror on my way to bed. I stopped. Turned back. Looked at myself for a moment. And without thinking, I whispered, "I'm trying." For the first time, the reflection looking back at me didn't feel disappointed. It felt like it believed me. About 2.5 months into sobriety, the past stopped knocking quietly and started beating on my door. Not metaphorically, literally. One Friday night, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, Nico. We used to drink together like it was a competitive sport. Shots, beers, cocktails, whatever was in front of us, we turned it into a ritual. A brotherhood built on blurry nights and forgotten mornings. His message was simple. "Long time. Let's catch up tonight." My stomach tightened. There were no emojis, no explanations. Just an invitation loaded with ghosts. A few minutes later, he added, "Same bar as always?" Of course. The bar where I'd laughed too loudly, confessed secrets I barely remembered, and once fell asleep in a bathroom stall at 2 a.m. That bar knew me far too well. I stared at the message like it was a test I hadn't studied for. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, a deep, primal part, felt the pull of nostalgia. Not for the alcohol itself, but for who I thought I was back then. Confident. Reckless. Free. Those were all lies, but in moments of weakness, lies can feel safer than truth. I typed, "I'm sober now." Then deleted it. Typed again. "I'm busy." Deleted that too. My fingers hovered, trembling slightly, over the keyboard. Eventually I wrote, "Can tonight. Hope you're good." Short. Neutral. Protective. He replied instantly. "Lame. You changed." I didn't answer. The words stung more than they should have. Maybe because they were true. I had changed. I was changing every day, painfully, slowly, stubbornly. But to people like Nico, people who still lived inside the haze I'd crawled out of, my change felt like betrayal. That night, I sat on my couch, phone face down, feeling the weight of loss settle around me. Sobriety wasn't just about quitting drinking. It was about outgrowing people, places, habits. Letting go of entire versions of myself. I didn't expect grief to be part of recovery, but there it was, sharp and silent. Later, I checked social media. Nico had posted a picture at the bar. Same dim lights, same sticky tables, same half-formed memories. I saw the empty seat next to him and imagined myself there, laughing, drinking, spiraling backward. Instead, I turned off my phone, made tea, and sat in the quiet. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel strong. But it felt right. Around the 3-month mark, something shifted. I don't know if it was stress, exhaustion, or the universe testing my limits, but one day, everything collapsed at once. Work was a disaster. A project I'd spent weeks on fell apart, and my boss hinted, not gently, that my focus seemed off lately. My car battery died right after. Then the grocery bag ripped open in the middle of the sidewalk, scattering everything like the world was mocking me. By the time I got home, I was vibrating with frustration. My skin felt too tight, my thoughts too loud. The apartment smelled like stale air and loneliness. I walked to the kitchen without thinking, pure instinct. My hands opened cabinets I had emptied months ago. They searched for bottles that no longer existed. The muscle memory was terrifying. My chest tightened as a realization hit me. I didn't want to drink. I wanted the relief of not being me for a moment. My throat burned with the familiar longing. I grabbed my keys. I actually grabbed them. I made it to the front door. My hand touched the handle. I could already see it. The walk to the corner store, the hum of the freezer section, the cold bottle in my palm. I imagined twisting the cap, the first sharp burn sliding down my throat. For a few seconds, it felt inevitable, like gravity. Then, something unexpected happened. I heard a sound, a soft thud from my bedroom. When I turned, I saw my journal had fallen off the nightstand. It lay open on the floor, flipped to a page I had written weeks earlier. The words stared up at me in shaky handwriting. If you relapse, you'll survive it. But you'll have to start from day one again. And day one almost killed you. My knees weakened. I slid down the door and sat on the floor, keys digging into my palm. I read the line again and again, until the craving loosened its grip. Not gone, never gone, but quieter. Manageable. I didn't go to the store. I didn't drink. Instead, I sat there for almost an hour, breathing hard, shaking, feeling every inch of the battle I had just fought. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't inspiring. But it was survival. That night, I learned something crucial. Cravings don't always announce themselves. They sneak up when you're tired, when you're angry, when life feels unfair. And sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is one small reminder of why you started this fight. Sobriety has a strange way of turning your mind into a museum of every mistake you've ever made. Around month 4, the exhibits started opening one by one, whether I wanted them to or not. I found myself remembering things I had buried under years of drunken fog, harsh words, broken promises, careless nights. And suddenly the need to apologize settled on me like heavy armor. It started with my sister. We hadn't talked much in the past year, not since the night I showed up at her apartment slurring, insisting I was totally fine, while she stood in the doorway with her kids watching from behind her legs. I barely remembered the argument, only the shame the next morning when she didn't answer my calls. One afternoon, I dialed her number. My hand shook as the phone rang. When she answered with a cautious, "Hello?" something inside me tightened. I forced the words out. "I'm sober now," I said. I'm sorry for everything." There was a long pause. I heard her breathe in slowly. "Thank you," she finally said. "Not forgiveness. Not warmth. Just thank you." But it was more than I deserved, and it felt like a step towards something better. Apologizing didn't magically fix anything. People didn't fall into my arms or tell me they had missed me every day. Mostly, they were hesitant. Guarded. They had boundaries now, boundaries I'd taught them to build. Some didn't reply at all when I reached out. That one hurt the most. But I understood. Sobriety didn't erase the past. It only gave me the clarity to see it clearly for the first time. The hardest apology was one I couldn't deliver. Emily. Her name still lived in the back of my mind, a soft echo that refused to quiet down. I typed a message to her at least a dozen times. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sober now. I hope you're doing well." But I never hit send. Something held me back, maybe fear, maybe respect, Maybe the understanding that some doors should stay closed, not because I didn't care, but because I had already caused enough damage. Instead, I wrote her a letter I never mailed. 4 pages of honesty I wish I had been capable of back then. When I finished, I folded it carefully and tucked it into my journal. Not for her, for me. A reminder that growth doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it simply means taking responsibility. Recovery wasn't just about staying sober anymore. It was about learning to live with the person I had been, and becoming someone I could face in the mirror. By month 5, the world felt quieter than ever, not peaceful quiet, but hollow quiet. A silence that stretched across my days like an empty room. People assume sobriety fills your life with clarity, gratitude, purpose. Maybe eventually it does. But in the middle of it, all I felt was lonely. It wasn't the loneliness of being physically alone. It was the loneliness of realizing how many connections in my life were built on alcohol. Without the shared buzz, the late-night chaos, the unfiltered conversations fueled by drinks, I didn't know how to relate to half the people I used to call friends. Our group chats fell silent. Invitations stopped coming. My phone, once constantly buzzing, became a still, cold brick on the table. I tried to fill the space. I went to meetings. I went for walks. I sat in coffee shops pretending to read while watching other people live lives that seemed so much simpler than mine. Couples laughing over pastries. Friends taking pictures. Strangers typing on laptops, headphones in, absorbed in their worlds. I envied them, not for their happiness, but for their normalcy. One night, the loneliness hit me like a wave. I was sitting on the floor in my living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the distant sounds of the city outside my window. I felt like I was floating in the middle of a life I didn't fully recognize anymore. Everything familiar had shifted. Everything safe had become dangerous. And everything I used to lean on was gone. I tried calling a friend. No answer. I tried watching a movie. Turned it off after 10 minutes. I tried journaling, but the words felt heavy and shallow. So I just sat there, breathing in a space that felt too big for me. For the first time, I said out loud, "I miss who I used to be." And then, like a knife twisting, I realized I didn't really miss that person. I missed not feeling alone. But loneliness wasn't the enemy I thought it was. In the following days, something shifted. Instead of running from the silence, I started listening to it. I let it force me inward. I let it strip away the noise I had used to distract myself for so long. Loneliness taught me the difference between being alone and being abandoned, and somewhere in that distinction, I found a strange kind of strength. Because if I could survive my own company, maybe I could survive anything. Around the 6-month mark, something small but significant happened. I laughed. Not the polite laugh you give at work, not the forced smile you offer when someone tries to cheer you up. A real, unexpected, honest laugh that came from deep in my chest. It startled me. It felt foreign, like borrowing someone else's voice. But it was mine. And it lingered in my ribs long after the moment passed. It happened during a meeting, of all places. Morrow, the man with the calm voice and the weathered hands, told a story about how he once tried to meditate but ended up falling asleep and snoring so loudly the instructor asked him to leave. His delivery was dead serious, which made it even funnier. For a moment, the entire room cracked open. And I cracked open with it. That moment stayed with me for days. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary. I had forgotten that joy didn't need to be chased with alcohol. It could appear quietly, unexpectedly, in the middle of a circle of chairs and bad coffee. After that, I started searching for small joys, not grand awakenings or cinematic breakthroughs, just pieces of light I hadn't noticed before. The warmth of sunlight on my face during a morning walk. The satisfaction of finishing a book without losing the plot halfway through. The comfort of a clean apartment. The first bite of a meal I actually remembered cooking. Little things that alcohol had numbed for years. I also rediscovered music. Not the kind that blasted through bars or drowned out my thoughts, but songs I used to love before drinking became my entire personality. One night, I put on headphones, lay on my bed, and let the music wash over me. I felt my chest swell with something like nostalgia, like grief, like gratitude, a strange cocktail of emotions that reminded me I was still human, still capable of feeling deeply. Of course, it wasn't all beautiful. Some days the joy didn't come. Some days I felt flat, exhausted, hollow. But I started noticing that these days didn't last as long as they used to. The darkness came, but it also passed. And that was new. Maybe the biggest shift was this: I stopped waiting for happiness to arrive in big, dramatic ways. Instead, I started collecting small joys like breadcrumbs leading me back to myself. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood: hope that joy wasn't gone forever. Just hidden. And now, finally, I was learning how to find it again. As I moved deeper into my 6th month sober, an emotion I wasn't prepared for began rising inside me: anger. Not the explosive kind I used to unleash when drunk, but a slow, simmering heat that lived under my skin. It showed up without warning, in traffic, in conversations, in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. It felt like I was grieving and furious at the same time. At first, I didn't understand it. I thought sobriety was supposed to make me calmer, softer, more at peace. Instead, I found myself clenching my jaw over tiny inconveniences and snapping at people I cared about. I felt betrayed by my own emotions, like my mind was punishing me for trying to heal. One evening, after a difficult day, I felt the anger building from the moment I walked in the door. The apartment looked the same as always: clean, quiet, orderly, but something about the stillness pushed me over the edge. I swept a stack of mail off the counter. It scattered across the floor like a silent explosion. And then I just stood there, breathing hard, fists tight, heart racing. Why was I so angry? At what? At whom? The truth was ugly. I was angry at myself. Angry at the years I lost, the people I hurt, the opportunities I'd wasted. Angry that I hadn't gotten sober sooner. Angry that sobriety felt harder, lonelier, and more confusing than anyone had warned me. I was angry that alcohol had controlled me, and even angrier that part of me still missed it. The next day, I brought it up at a meeting. My voice shook, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. But when I finished, Morrow nodded slowly and said, "Anger means you're finally feeling the things you drank to avoid. It's part of the work. Part of the work." I repeated that phrase in my head for days. Instead of drowning the anger, I started letting myself feel it. Really feel it. I wrote about it in my journal. I took longer walks. I cleaned when I felt myself boiling, scrubbing the sink like it had personally offended me. I punched a pillow more times than I want to admit. And slowly, the anger softened. It didn't disappear, but it started to make sense. Sobriety wasn't just healing, it was excavation. I was digging through layers of emotions I had buried for years. Some were painful. Some were surprising. Some I wasn't ready to face. But all of them were mine, and this time, I wasn't running. And in the quiet after the anger faded, I realized something important. Feeling everything, even the rage, meant I was alive again. By month 7, sobriety stopped feeling like a constant emergency, and started feeling like unfamiliar territory I had to learn to navigate. I had spent so long surviving that I'd forgotten how to simply live. Each day felt like an experiment, a slow rediscovery of routines that didn't revolve around drinking. The first big shift came when I realized I actually had free time. Real free time. Hours I used to waste in bars or recovering from them were suddenly open. At first, the emptiness terrified me. I didn't know what to do with long evenings that weren't blurred by alcohol. But gradually, curiosity replaced fear. I tried cooking again. Not the sad, microwave meals I used to throw together while half drunk, real cooking. Chopping onions, seasoning pans, following recipes. The first dish I made was terrible, but I remembered it. Every step. Every mistake. There was something honest about that. I started reading more, too. Whole chapters, whole books. For years I had pretended to read, flipping pages I would forget by morning. Now the words stayed with me. They painted pictures in my mind. They gave me something alcohol never did: connection without chaos. I also started taking care of my space. Cleaning wasn't just a chore anymore, it became a form of grounding. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years, rearranged furniture, opened windows to let air in that wasn't thick with the scent of old nights. My apartment slowly transformed into a place I wanted to return to, not just a place I crashed in. The hardest part of learning to live again was dealing with boredom. Real boredom. The kind that used to send me straight to the bottle. Now, without that escape, I had to sit with it. At first, it felt like failure, like life should be thrilling all the time. But then I realized something simple and freeing: sobriety wasn't supposed to be exciting. It was supposed to be stable. And stability, once foreign, began to feel like relief. One night I sat on my balcony, sipping a cup of mint tea. The city buzzed softly below me: cars, conversations, distant laughter. I felt present. Whole. Sober not just in body, but in mind. And the strangest part? I didn't miss the chaos. For the first time, peace didn't feel boring. It felt like progress. Around month 8, something strange started happening. I began running into the old version of myself everywhere. Not literally, but in flashes, in memories, in habits, in the way certain places seemed to whisper my past back to me. Sobriety had given me distance, but that distance made the old me feel like a ghost that still lingered in every corner of my life. It happened one night when I walked past a bar I used to frequent. The neon sign buzzed faintly, and through the window, I saw a group of people laughing, drinks raised, faces glowing under dim lights. For a moment, it felt like I was watching an old movie of my own life. I could almost see myself sitting in the corner booth, slouched, sloppy, loud, pretending to be happy. It wasn't nostalgia I felt, it was recognition. A quiet ache of remembering someone I no longer was, and someone I still wasn't fully free from. Later, I caught myself using an old phrase, something drunk me used all the time, and it hit me like a slap. I wasn't just grieving the chaos I left behind, I was grieving the person who lived inside it. That version of me wasn't evil or monstrous. He was hurting. Lost. Trying. And I realized I had spent months hating him, cursing him, wishing he had never existed. But without him, I wouldn't be here. Without his failures, I wouldn't have sought help. Without his pain, I wouldn't have learned how to heal. The ghost of who I used to be wasn't haunting me. He was asking to be acknowledged, not forgiven, not glorified, just seen. One evening, I sat in my bedroom with the lights off and spoke to him, quietly, awkwardly, like talking to a stranger who somehow knew me better than anyone else ever had. I told him I was angry. I told him I was disappointed. But I also told him thank you for surviving long enough for me to change. Something softened in me after that. The self-loathing loosened its grip. I stopped seeing my past as a monster in the shadows, and more like a chapter that had finally ended. The ghost didn't vanish. He walks with me sometimes, in memories, in triggers, in the small remnants of habits I'm still unlearning. But he doesn't scare me anymore. He doesn't control me. Now, he's just a reminder of how far I've come, and how far I still can go. Around month 10 I hit a wall. A real one, not the kind people talk about casually, but a dense, suffocating barrier that made every step forward feel impossible. I woke up one morning and felt nothing. No motivation. No pride. No progress. Just a heavy, aching emptiness that clung to me like wet clothing. I had expected cravings. I had expected sadness, anger, guilt. But I wasn't prepared for the numbness. It terrified me more than any urge to drink ever had. At least cravings made me feel something. This was different, quiet, cold, and deeply hollow. For the first time in months, I wondered if sobriety was even worth it. If I was ever going to feel fully alive again. That day, I skipped my meeting. Then I skipped the next one. I told myself I needed rest, that I wasn't slipping. But I knew the truth. I was avoiding the very people who understood me because I didn't want them to see how fragile I still was. I wanted to be further along, stronger, more heroic in my recovery. Instead, I felt like a fraud. The breaking point came late one night. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, feeling like a ghost inside my own body. The silence in the room pressed against my ears. Tears came without warning, hot, relentless, the kind that feel like they're pulled from the deepest part of you. I didn't cry softly. I sobbed, chest shaking, breath stuttering, like something inside me had finally given way. When it was over, I felt empty but lighter. And in that stillness, a thought surfaced, quiet but clear. I don't want to drink. I just want relief. For months, I had mistaken these moments for cravings, but now I understood the difference. I didn't want alcohol. I wanted escape. Comfort. Rest. And I needed to learn how to find those things without destroying myself. The next morning, puffy-eyed and exhausted, I went back to a meeting. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want pity. I just wanted to sit in a room where my silence didn't need to be explained. When the session ended, Morrow came over. He didn't ask questions. He just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "The numbness means your mind is rewiring. Sometimes healing feels like nothing at all." Something in me loosened at those words. Maybe I wasn't failing. Maybe this was part of the process, the ugly, quiet, necessary part no one advertises. That evening, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. I didn't break. I bent. And I'm still here. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was the beginning of it. By month 11, sobriety no longer felt like a punishment or a test. It felt like a path, uneven, unpredictable, but leading somewhere real. I started noticing changes in myself that went beyond clearer skin or steadier mornings. My thoughts felt sharper. My emotions felt more honest. My choices felt intentional instead of impulsive. It was like watching a new version of myself take shape in slow motion. But with that growth came a strange fear. Who was I becoming? And what would happen to the person I used to be? It hit me hardest one afternoon as I cleaned out a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside were relics of my old life, ticket stubs from nights I barely remembered, photos where my smile looked wide but hollow, receipts from bars I couldn't name anymore. I held each object with a kind of curiosity, like they belonged to a stranger whose memories I had somehow inherited. For a moment I panicked. If I kept growing, kept healing, kept transforming, would I even recognize myself a year from now? Would the people around me still understand me? Would I understand myself? That fear pressed on my chest for days. I'd never realized how much of my identity I had tied to the chaos, the recklessness, the constant searching for a drink or a distraction. Without all that noise, who was I supposed to be? The answer came unexpectedly during a conversation with a woman from my group, Lena. She was 10 years sober, calm in a way that made you want to sit beside her just to borrow a little peace. I told her my fear, embarrassed by how childish it sounded. She smiled and said, "You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming who you were always supposed to be." Those words followed me all day, echoing softly every time I doubted myself. I realized I had spent years confusing my wounds with my identity. The drinking, the self-destruction, the chaos. They were chapters, not definitions. Sobriety wasn't erasing me. It was revealing me. So I started embracing the parts of myself I had forgotten long before alcohol ever took hold. My curiosity. My quiet strength. My ability to care deeply. My desire for meaning instead of distraction. I wasn't losing the person I used to be. I was integrating them, taking the lessons, leaving the damage, and moving forward with both eyes open. By the end of month 11, something shifted inside me. I felt grounded, steady, almost comfortable in my own skin. For the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel terrifying or unreachable. It felt possible. As the one-year mark approached, I kept expecting some grand revelation, a cinematic moment where the sky opened, music swelled, and everything suddenly made sense. But life didn't hand me fireworks. It handed me something quieter, something steadier, clarity. The night before my anniversary, I sat alone in my apartment. No distractions, no noise, no chaos waiting to swallow me whole. Just me, sober, breathing, alive. The quiet used to terrify me. Now it felt like an old friend finally returning with open arms. I thought about the person I had been a year ago, desperate, exhausted, clinging to the last threads of hope. I didn't judge them anymore. I didn't pity them either. I simply acknowledged them as the version of me who refused to give up. On the morning of my 1-year milestone, I woke up before my alarm. My room was filled with soft light, the kind that makes everything look forgiving. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for some overwhelming emotion to crash over me. Pride, joy, relief. But nothing dramatic happened. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of certainty, as if something inside me finally clicked into place. I made coffee and drank it slowly, fully aware of the moment. No shaking hands. No headache. No regret clinging to my skin. Just a simple, peaceful morning. It struck me then, maybe this was the victory. Not the celebration, not the applause, not the milestone itself, but the ordinary morning that wasn't poisoned by the night before. Later, I went to my meeting. People hugged me, clapped my back, handed me a small chip with 1 year engraved on it. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. Not heavy, but meaningful. A symbol of every battle fought in silence, every craving resisted, every painful truth faced sober. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't make a speech. I simply said, I didn't get here because I was strong. I got here because I kept trying, even on the days I didn't want to. The room was quiet in that warm way that tells you people understand. Walking home, I realized something important. Sobriety didn't give me a new life. It gave me the chance to build one. Slowly. Imperfectly. Honestly. And for the first time, I wasn't rushing toward anything. I was content taking one step at a time. That night, I placed my 1-year chip on my nightstand. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that healing isn't loud. It's quiet. Consistent. Unseen by most. But deeply, fiercely powerful. And with that simple truth, I stepped into the next chapter of my life, not cured, not perfect, but present.